Well, hopefully my voice is loud enough here. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to participate and to contribute towards this great event that's happening and organized by Asset Management Ontario. So we're going to talk about the tool that's been around for quite a long time called the PIEVC protocol. I guess it was originally called the PIEVC engineering protocol because it was developed by engineers for engineers in its original development. I should say by way of background that prior to my joining ICLR, I was with Engineers Canada for 23 years. So I was involved with the development of this protocol from its very beginnings. So Dan, could you go to the next slide? So we started this, as I mentioned, quite a long time ago. I guess it'll be 16 years this summer that we started with the first meeting of the PIEVC, and I should say it stands for the Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee that was formed to look at the vulnerability of public infrastructure in Canada. And we quickly realized that a tool was required to actually do that kind of assessment. And so this led to the development of what we call the PIEVC protocol. We are partnered with the Natural Resources Canada, and it was a 50-50 funding partnership between Engineers Canada and NRCan. And so that development continued from 2005 to 2012. And then from then on, the protocol had been developed and Engineers Canada offered it up until last year, when it was divested to the ICLR. The protocol itself was developed originally by engineers to really understand what would be the impacts, the risks on public infrastructures from climate events, and use that information to plan for the design of it, the rehabilitation. It has input on operations and maintenance, and really to look at all, contribute the risk perspective on adaptation measures for public infrastructure. So we found as we were developing the protocol that it required a professional team that wasn't just engineers. We certainly need climate scientists to understand the climate, natural scientists like geologists, hydrologists, planners, risk managers, asset managers, and very, very importantly, I guess the operators and the maintainers of the infrastructure, because they know it best. And of course, the outputs of this process contribute towards decision-making and adaptation planning. Next slide. So probably by now, one might say this is almost becoming a standard practice to undertake climate risk and vulnerability assessments. That certainly in the last 3 or 4 years has really become prominent in I guess planning, asset management, and operations and maintenance. And this little diagram here, of course, the impacts of climate on infrastructure have been huge over the years. The right-hand side shows a somewhat dated summary of and the insurance costs related to those events. So we've had floods, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, extreme rain events, and so forth. And these have produced a lot of damage to infrastructure and a lot of costs to repair that infrastructure. And the diagram on the left is really a summary of ways to intervene on adapting infrastructure to handle extreme events. So the earlier that you intervene, the faster that your infrastructure recovers and the lower the cost. If you do nothing and an event happens, then you're going to have a very severe loss of functionality, and it's going to cost you a lot of money and time. And for smaller municipalities, you may not have the capital resources to recover completely, so you may have something less than you had before. So it's really important, I think, to understand your risks and vulnerabilities as a way of planning to handle potential future climate events, as well as the creep of climate, as we call it, where the climate is, of course, in itself changing slowly. And so some of the values that have been used in design in the past or based on historical data that is no longer valid. And a lot of efforts have gone in over the last few years to update that data and, of course, the climate projections in science. Next slide. So just to, because I'm an engineer, we have to have at least one flow diagram in a presentation. And this is no different. This is a description of the protocol. It's documented in a publication that you can see on the right. The most recent update is 2016. It's at version 10 now. We're looking at version 11 to reflect the practice over the last few years, but it's a systematic step process where you define the project, you understand what the scope is of your assessment, you get the data, both the climate data, the infrastructure data. You run a risk assessment using a framework that's proposed in the protocol. Very important part of that risk assessment is that it's a collective process done normally through workshops where you get players together. It's not just a desktop study. This is bringing in the users of the infrastructure, the operators of the infrastructure, and so forth together in workshops to assess risks using the framework. And you can either, depending on the extent of analysis required and money and time, I guess, you can do more quantitative analysis, which is called the engineering analysis, or you proceed to conclusions and recommendations and then reporting. And I would just like to say that the protocol is giving you information on a risk profile on your infrastructure, but it doesn't, you haven't done anything yet in terms of adaptation. It is contributing towards adaptation decision-making. So it's an important step in the process to translate what do we do about climate change and infrastructure, and then what we can do to adapt to it. So this process informs it from a risk point of view. On the just on the right side or in the middle there is another module that we have within the protocol that assesses adaptation options from a sustainability perspective. So it looks at the environmental, societal, and cost elements, and through a multi-criteria analysis. So you can evaluate different options for adaptation following the completion of an assessment. Next slide. So it's, as I mentioned, it's been applied across Canada, and the little diagram in the middle there is referred to as a risk matrix. The protocol has a default of 7 levels, but you can change that to be 3 or 5 depending on what your risk profile you want to have. And if you look at the center diagram there, if you have a flood that's of a rare event but a high consequence, with the shift in climate change, that flood happens more often into a high risk zone, shifts it into a high risk zone. And through adaptation, you can reduce risk to an acceptable level. And really, what adaptation of infrastructure is about is risk reduction. You can't eliminate risk, but you get it to a level that you feel that your owner of the infrastructure is willing to live with, one might say. Next slide. So the steps, I've gone through most of those. This kind of gives a summary, and I won't go through every line here, but just to say that it's a very structured process. It's very, I would say it's a rigorous process, but it is a qualitative process. It's not a quantitative. But one of the advantages of it is that it doesn't require complete data, or one might even say perfect data. You can use professional judgment and having the right people at the table to understand risks and to define them is a way of overcoming some of the data gaps. And the climate analysis that's required for it is, we don't need climate parameters to the 4th decimal place. We just need to know the approximate trend in climate parameters, and that gets translated into a scoring system that's used for the qualitative assessment. Next slide. So we've applied this to a wide range of infrastructures. There's different categories there, and the number of completed assessments. So we're we're up to well over 70, and there's a lot already that are underway. So things have really picked up over the last couple of years. I guess the point here is that we haven't found an infrastructure yet that this process can't be applied to. And we've actually started to get into natural infrastructure. For example, we've looked at parks and recreation facilities. So we think it could be applied to natural infrastructure, although it hasn't, there's limited there. But you can see the range and the number of completed assessments that are there. So, and these assessments are on the website. So we operate a website, which Dan will talk a little bit more about. But all these reports, that's part of the objective, is to make sure these reports are publicly available, posted on a website. It's a collection, a body of knowledge that I think can be used by many for research and reference purposes. Next slide. So I'll turn it over to you, Dan, and you can go from there.
Right. Thank you very much, David. And thanks again for having ICLR in to talk about the PIEVC program. It's a great honor. And I'd also like to say that it's a great honor to work with David Lapp over the past 6 months on adapting the program and taking it on at ICLR. His knowledge and experience is really quite incredible, and it's been a real pleasure. So first, a few notes about how what we are referring to as the PIEVC program partnership have come to operate the PIEVC program. So first, there was a divestment process organized by Engineers Canada throughout 2019-2020. There was a number of nonprofit organizations that were invited to submit a proposal to take over the full PIEVC program. So the PIEVC program includes the protocol and different elements of the protocol, including the website, the networks, and a number of other products that were sort of partially underway when the program ended at Engineers Canada. So among the groups that were invited, there were about 7 groups that were invited to submit a proposal. There are 3 groups, us, Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, a group called the Climate Risk Institute based in Sudbury at Laurentian University, and also the German International Development Agency, GIZ, which had been involved quite extensively in applying the PIEVC protocol in international projects. There was no payment involved in assuming the program. The partnership that we formed committed to maintain the program as it was, to make sure that it continues to be available, but also to develop the program and grow the program, grow its use, increase the number of products that were offered through the program. Another important element of the process of our partnership taking over the PIEVC protocol is that we are going to maintain the primary tenets of the PIEVC program. And that includes offering the protocol for free for any public infrastructure vulnerability assessments in Canada. So that's first, that we're absolutely maintaining that aspect of the program. And the other part is what David mentioned before, which is publication of reports. So if you go to the website, I'll give you the link later on, there are currently about 60 reports. These are full assessment reports that were developed using the PIEVC process for infrastructure across Canada in all different sectors. And a very important part that what we consider to be sort of the primary public good of this program is to make sure that these vulnerability assessment reports remain in the public arena for education and for growing the practice of climate change vulnerability assessments in Canada and internationally. Just a few words about ICLR, since we happen to be here presenting. As we've mentioned, there's a partnership that runs this program. So ICLR is an institute of Western University, housed under the engineering department there. We were formed in 1997 to protect people and property against the impacts of extreme natural events. We are an independent nonprofit, but we're also developed and supported and currently supported largely by the Canadian property and casualty insurance industry. We have sort of a voluntary membership that provides a good portion of our regular funding, but we are independent of the insurance industry and housed within University of Western Ontario. A lot of our work involves reducing the risk of extreme events, impacts on housing, residential buildings across Canada. There's a couple of images of our labs. The top lab is our basement flood protection lab, where we test private side basement flood protection technologies that are applied in Canada. The bottom image is a project that we worked on in the Windy Dome at Western University. That's a model of Dunrobin. And the purpose there is to understand what happened in Dunrobin as the tornado moved through the community. So we're involved in a lot of work, including this sort of serious academic work that results in journal publications. And then we focus our work on applying the science that we find through these partnerships. So I just wanted to offer a few points quickly on what sets the PIEVC protocol apart. So first, it's an well-established method. It's been used now for 15 years. It's got a large number of applications across a wide range of infrastructures. So that's one critical component of the PIEVC program, is that it can apply to any infrastructure. The process is very scalable, adaptable, and indeed it has been applied across a wide range of infrastructures. It's a made in Canada approach. Its access is free, as I mentioned before. It doesn't require, as David mentioned before, comprehensive complete data. It's a screening process, and it can lead into more quantitative assessment processes. It's highly scalable, adaptable. There's also an important part of the program is the comprehensive network of infrastructure owners, consultants, subject matter experts, all the people that we communicate with. We try to keep up with them, invite them to workshops, get them involved in development of new products. And that's one major part of the PIEVC program. As David mentioned before as well, the project workshops, the workshops that are part of the PIEVC protocol process are a very important part of the process. They're an important education and learning opportunity for people involved in infrastructure. And one additional thing that we hear frequently from users of the protocol is that it gives a very good opportunity to bring people in that don't normally get to be involved in these types of projects, and help them learn about what the potential impacts of climate change, and also learn from them, especially operations staff that really know the infrastructure in the field. They are provided a great opportunity, and the assessment team can learn from their experience in the field as well. As I mentioned before, we strive to make all reports publicly available. There are many cases where we can't publish reports because of confidential information, but wherever possible, we very much push to have the reports available on the website. Also, we're linked to the Infrastructure Resilience Professional Program that's run by the Climate Risk Institute. And as part of that program, there is an education module focused on the PIEVC protocol that's available to anybody who'd be interested. So there is education available on how to use the protocol. And as I mentioned before, there's growing international application, which we also learn from. We learn from GIZ's experience internationally and bring those experiences back to Canada. Just to give an example, we're developing currently a new product called the High-Level Screening Guide, responding to some of the users' comments that the full protocol process is complex and it requires data that, in some cases you have to go look for, and some projects are short-term, projects like climate lens assessments. And so there was a request by the user community to develop a streamlined version of the PIEVC protocol. So that's currently underway. And I just wanted to give the example here of the breadth of organizations that are involved, or that we like to involve in development of our products, across the board, all levels of government, especially infrastructure owners and those groups that will be using the products once completed. So that's also an important part of our program, is to work with the communities that use the protocol. And just to conclude here, a few notes on where we're going. The current priorities for the PIEVC program include completion for its application in Canada, include completion of this high-level screening guide. This is a guide that can be used for asset screening or potentially even a portfolio analysis that's been requested by some of the users. There's actually an international example in Brazil of a portfolio analysis of ports that we're also bringing into this development. So we plan to have that out mid-year, and again, we'll work with the community to make sure that it's accessible and usable. The 6-course training program concerning the PIEVC protocol is currently available. One session just concluded recently, but there will be more sessions in the future, especially if there's demand. So please connect with us, connect with the Climate Risk Institute or ICLR or PIEVC if you're interested, and we'll work with the Climate Risk Institute to make sure that the protocol training course is available when there's appropriate demand. We're also developing with our partners national, international communities of practice to give us an opportunity to regularly hear from our users and the infrastructure owners about potential improvements, new products, and to give them a forum to talk to each other about application of the protocol and climate vulnerability assessments in general. And also just a commitment from the new partnership for continued support for users of the PIEVC protocol. There's a group, you can connect with us via the website. The address is pievc@iclr.org. If there's any questions about the protocol, its use, its historical use, historical reports, if you want to connect with people who've applied it for different infrastructure assessments, that's what we're here for. And that's all available via the website. So I'll end it there, and thank you very much for your attention. And we look forward to questions. Thank you.